This meeting is being recorded.
Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today I am honored to have you here at our first Legends of Hercules Mythic Monster crossover. And we have as our guest Joseph Schmalke. But first, before we get to Joseph, I'm going to share a brief impression of issue number 2 of Gods of Brutality. So listen and take heed, my friends, for the adventures of Hercules, Thor, and Nick are far from over. Gods of Brutality number 2 begins with our heroes in strategic retreat. We soon discover that the underworld has its own underworld, run by brutal mobsters who are also hideous were-rats. Hercules and Thor continue to combat each other, as well as the chitinous myrmidons of hell. Nick finally taps into and unleashes his own brutality, activating his warrior soul. But alas, he has not yet found his heroic heart. Would you know more, my friends? Good, then I suggest you seek out Gods of Brutality number 2 online or in your local comic book shop. And now again, we return to Joseph Schmalke. Greetings and welcome, Joseph. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Doing good.
Thanks for being here. So science fiction and horror are 2 of your areas of great interest.
That's correct. Yes, 100%.
Can you remember how your interest was sparked? I know you like cinematic monsters because they're all over your sites.
Yeah, so growing up, it was a thing in our house, I guess. When I was a kid, my father was really into the classic movie monsters like Frankenstein, Phantom of the Opera, Creature from the Black Lagoon. My mom was more of Friday the 13th and all the slashers, Nightmare on Elm Street. I saw all those when I was like 6, 7, 8. So yeah, it's been a part of my life ever since I was, tiny. And so, yeah, I've just always sort of gravitated back towards it.
And it stayed with you. And when did you first discover your creative abilities?
I think all little kids like to draw and paint and stuff like that. I'm not sure how much of it is like somebody's born with a talent or it's something you gravitate towards and you stick with it, and it's all about like sticking it out. I feel like that's how it is for music too. Like people either really love their craft or they don't, and that's why the world's so diverse, right? People have veered towards one sort of career or another. For me, it was always illustration was a big thing, and painting, and but overall I generally love storytelling. And so comic books was sort of like the combining of all of that into one thing.
What were your favorite horror comics growing up?
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, a lot of the horror comics had been banned at that point. So I remember getting a giant size magazine of Death Rattle. And then there was my dad had a whole bunch of these eerie comics.
I
And
remember
then
those.
yeah, and then of course Tales from the Crypt were sort of there, but like you had to go hunt them down. They weren't like on bookshelves or anything. And then but yeah, there wasn't necessarily, when I was collecting comics, when I was really into comics at that time, the only like quote unquote horror books that were out at that time were the Vertigo ones, or what became Vertigo Comics, which was Swamp Thing and Sandman.
Yeah, I'm a big Sandman fan. I love Neil Gaiman's stuff. I'm glad it's finally coming to TV.
Hollywood's done a lot of great things for comic books and all that, but I really like the purity of that series. That's still one of my all-time favorite books to read.
How has it affected your art? I'm sure it served as one of your inspirations for writing, for drawing.
So for art, so that's the great thing about comic books, right? Is that it doesn't come from like the art is one aspect of it, the writing is another aspect of it, and then the genre is, you know, wherever you place it. So a lot of my writing influences, I don't know, it depends on what I'm reading at the time, I guess. Um, so yeah, I was a pretty prolific reader for a couple of years, a lot of Vonnegut, Salinger, Stephen King. I mean, it kind of ran the gambit there. And, you know, I try to read popular stuff too. But yeah, I'm a historical buff, and a lot of that makes its way into my writing. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I know we'll get to it, but one of the reasons me and Rich always worked well together is that we do the research, and then this research inspires the stories. So if I know I'm working on, say, a satanic witch story, I'll go and I'll do research on satanic witches. And I always think the truth is stranger than fiction, and it makes
Yes,
for a
it
better
is.
story. So yeah.
Yeah, I interview a lot of folks who come from the fringe areas of our existence and kind of live there. And it's always fascinating getting their perspective on a variety of things. The research is one of the fun parts of that. Now, I love the titles you have for your books, like "We Don't Kill Spiders." What is that about?
So when I was growing up in Louisiana, so another thing where me and Rich found camaraderie is that we're both kids that were raised in the deep South. And one of the things that you have down there is a lot of insects, right? It's sort of like New Orleans is a bunch of termites holding hands. But one of the things was spiders. You know, your initial reaction is like, oh, insect, get rid of it. And my mom was always like, no, don't do that. They help kill everything else, you know, that you don't want. And so we've sort of made it a point in my house. My daughter's standing behind me. I could tell somebody was back there, but I couldn't see them. Do you want to
Hi.
pop your head in?
Yes, she appeared like a ghost and disappeared.
Yeah, it's hard
There
for
she
it
is.
to read her. But anyway, so yeah, it was always like, don't get rid of those things because they get rid of all the insects we don't like mosquitoes and stuff like that. And so that phrase, "we don't kill spiders in this house," stuck in my head. And then years later, when I went to write this book, I did some research on Viking lore, and I couldn't find anything that said that there was any kind of spider gods really in Viking mythos. And so that gave me fertile ground to create this god that had been forgotten by their pantheon. And that's kind of a spoiler. When you get into issue 2, you get more of the background on it. But basically, this necromantic witch is the last servant of this forgotten god, and that's what gives her a certain part of her power.
Are you resonant with Viking mythology and spirituality or worldviews?
Well, I studied classical literature in college, so I was pretty well versed in Greek and Roman mythology, particularly Greek. I think it's fascinating where world religions come from. I was raised in 3 separate Christian faiths, and baptized in all of them. And I mean, you know, belief is belief, right?
Right.
There's all sorts of different ones out there. And I think it's fascinating how people have tried to answer questions that we've had since the dawn of time. And how you get to those conclusions is always fun too. But yeah, I don't know. I dabble in everything, right? It may be like a student of everything, master of none, kind of thing, where I learn enough so that I can tell a story and make it interesting, but probably I'm not the be all end all person for any particular faith or religious worldview.
Since you're familiar with the Greek, I'm sure you're aware of Arachne, and then there's Anansi. Neil Gaiman used
Yeah,
Anansi, spider gods, and
definitely those were ones that were bigger, right? But of course, like I said, I couldn't find anything in the Nordic tribes where spiders meant anything. I think the closest it came to anything like that was Loki. Maybe had turned into something close to a spider at some point. But
I'm more curious about the book now. I spent years studying like Viking runes and Viking mythology, and I used to teach classes on these things. So I'd be very curious as to how you constructed within the context of the mythology, like a forgotten god. And it is possible. They had tribes of gods, and everybody was a god, even if they weren't a famous god who's in the spotlight or part of the ruling class of gods. There were like in Greek. You can't even know who all the gods are. There's so many of them.
hmm.
Each local stream had a god, and each activity had a god. And
I actually knew you were really into all this stuff. This book is fantastic. I don't know
yeah,
if you've ever read it.
yes,
One of my favorite reads out there. This was given to me several years ago by Shirley Giriff. Her husband was this was back in 2002. This was gifted to me, and her husband was I believe he taught at BU in classical literature, and this was a book that he was recommending. But I really like how this sort of like makes Greek mythology. It breaks it down for you in a very simple and digestible
yeah.
way, and it's also kind of a naughty book too. It's all very sexualized in a certain way, but it's cool. It's a good read.
That book is amongst a stack of books that are maybe like inches from my bed on the shelf
Oh,
of it.
right on,
Yeah, I have
right
like
on.
a short library book, well, for my library, not from the local library, but like a space where I have all my important books, and that's one of them there. So thank you.
Oh yeah.
And how about Cherry Blackbird?
So I wrote a book back in 2007 called The Calamitous Black Devils, and it was my first published comic book. And at the time, I really wanted to do something that was horror and sci-fi combined. And it's a World War II story about this elite brigade of army operatives that go behind enemy lines to stop Nazis from opening this doorway to another world that's going to unleash this god on Earth that will basically help them conquer and whatever. It didn't quite have the effect I was hoping it would. People were like, this isn't really scary at all. This is more sci-fi. And I was like, okay. And I think it was a woman at Boston. Can you swear on this thing, or would you prefer me not to? I like to ask.
I prefer you don't a lot, but people
All right.
do. So it's okay.
All right.
I put that it's not.
I'm gonna attempt not to. But a
Okay.
woman basically said the story had no cojones, and I was, I took that to heart, and I was like, all right. So the next project that I work on, which was it was initially Cherry Blackbird was called Horror Babylon. That was the title of the book. So when I went to write that, I went to make something that was grindhouse. And by that, I mean, it was like an exploitation story that was over the top with big characters, hypersexuality and swear words and violence and just like everything. And it was also going to be gross and like maybe terrifying. And so that's what came out of the basically Calamitous Black Devils was followed by the Infernal Pact, and then Cherry Blackbird came immediately after that. But Infernal Pact and Cherry Blackbird are part of one basic story. So and it's part of a larger story too, where there's going to be 7 books in total. The first one arguably could be Infernal Pact or Cherry Blackbird. To me, it doesn't matter. But some people have said that if they read Cherry Blackbird first, the Infernal Pact makes more sense, even though that one was written first. and came out first. So I'm actually putting that one out this year. The Infernal Pact will be out this year. And it features a lot of the same crossover characters that were in Cherry Blackbird, but not the title character.
Okay.
So yeah,
that's fascinating. And how these books are part of a larger universe that you're building, it sounds
yeah,
like.
it's like an exploitation grindhouse universe is the story behind that. And so those I made, like 5, 6 years, 7 years ago.
Mhm.
Which it makes it look like over at Black Caravan all we make is rock stars that make deals with the devil and stuff like that, because you've got Gods of Brutality, which literally came out last year, and so did Cherry Blackbird, but Cherry Blackbird actually came out years earlier. So
Any plan to cross over these characters into?
if you read Cherry Blackbird, we can't cross it over.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to read Cherry Blackbird now. So that was the Calamitous Black Devils, the Infernal Pact, and Cherry Blackbird.
Yep.
Now you're working on a new project, according to the sites I looked at, called 7 Years in Darkness. What can you share about that? You have a Patreon. You have it on your
Yeah.
Patreon.
So I'm highly I love witch stories. I always thought the Satanic Witch was one of the most scary things that you could see in Hollywood. I was always drawn to the movies that featured them, like the Bloody Talons of Satan and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I wanted to do the most witchy thing that I had ever done. And 7 Years in Darkness is about a group of children whose parents are part of a cult are conscripted to the school of black magic for a duration of 7 years where they're devoid of the sun. That's the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it in the same universe as your other works, or is it in a new universe?
Maybe all my stuff is in the same universe. I don't
Okay.
know. I don't think about it too much, but yeah, every writer has their own voice, right? And
Right.
so I think if you read a bunch of my stuff next to each other, maybe it's all in the same place, but it always takes place in its own. All these stories take place in their own time, and where we open with 7 Years in Darkness, it's the 80s. So I've never had a story that takes place in the 80s. This is it. And of course, it's only for 7 years, though, right? That's the. But where you read Cherry Blackbird and the Infernal Pact, it's clearly like the early 2000s or the late 90s or something. And then you get the 40s with Calamitous Black Devils, and then with We Don't Kill Spiders, clearly based in the Viking age. So, and then with the Electric Black, we literally have something that breaks all of those things. Me and Rich both write and illustrate that book, and it's a shop that transverses time and space, so it can be anywhere at any point in time. It breaks all those rules. So that's a pretty interesting title just on its own.
Yeah, that is. And I love stories like that with time travel and alternate realities and alternate universes. Aside from liking mythology or actually being obsessed with mythology, I guess would be a more accurate way to say it. I also do a lot of altered state type of work, not with substances, through meditation and breathing and things like that. So I know that we can all access more easily through our dreams, but also through meditation, all sorts of really, freaky stuff. So violating space and time becomes passé after a while when you're doing
You
stuff
ever
like
do the thing where you try to be awake or lucid dreaming,
lucid
where
dreaming. Yeah.
yeah.
What I found is with lucid dreaming, we're lucid a lot during the night. It's just that we're taught to edit it out. Like we edit out a lot of our experience during the day, like how much of the day do you actually remember at the end of the day? It becomes kind of like a blur. And the same thing with dreams. There's lucidity numerous times. We just kind of put it aside in the dream and just keep on dreaming. But that is, have you ever experimented with that? That's really fascinating practice.
I mean, I tried a couple of times in the 90s to sort of do it. You'd have like an object on you that you would always, if
Yeah.
the object came into view, you'd ask yourself if you were dreaming, but I could never pull it off because I was effing off all the time doing, early 20s stuff. And so I couldn't stick with it. But yeah, there are a couple of vivid dreams that I've had in my life, but the worst is I have paralytic nightmares every once in a while. And those are absolutely terrifying. And so you can see where like Freddy Krueger's and things like that come from. And yeah, you actually do feel a dark presence in your life, and it's very foreboding, and it makes it hard to sleep. So yeah, nowadays I just like to sleep through the night and not remember much. I have some very wacky dreams, but yeah. I used to have a lot of nightmares, not so much anymore. Now I like it when it's chill, to be honest.
May that continue to be so. Have these dreams that you had though made it into your work?
No, because they really make no sense most of the time. Okay. Even the good ones, the particularly horrific ones, almost never make it in because I don't want to go back and revisit it. And plus they don't make much sense. It's hard to construct a story around chaos. That's my 2 cents on it.
Understood. Now you mentioned the Electric Black, what you're working on with Rich. You also work on titles with other people, like you have Murder Hobo with Jason Lynch.
Yep. So Jason is acting in more of a design capacity now. It's me and this guy Ryan Brown are working on the book, and it's about a group of adventurers that are just the worst. They are thieves, they're drug addicts, they're concerned about themselves, they're very selfish people, but it's a comedy. It's not like embracing them. They're actually quite horrible, and it's funny to watch them either fail or succeed. So, and it's a term from people
D&D.
that role play. Yeah. So that's where the name came from. Is I started hearing a lot of people complaining about murder hobos in their games, and I was like, I want to write a whole story about murder hobos, just like ruining all the well-laid plans that could be made out. So it's actually not one guy. There's 5 of them all together, and they have a ringmaster kind of, and he's not necessarily a murder hobo, but he's like unofficially a murder hobo. So there's Lord Froth, he's their leader, or if you were thinking about him as the X-Men, he would be their Charles Xavier, where he's not out in the field doing anything, but he's sort of like, keeps the home fires burning and sends them off on their missions. But their field leader is Roddy the Rotten, and he's like a little gnomish man who's a drunkard, and he's the only human on the team. Then there's Venus, and she's a demon who's also a pyromancer. There's Spectra Liaison, which is an elven frost wizard. You've got Blarn, who's basically the biggest guy on the team, and he's an orc. And then you got Burgle, and he's this little fish man that's a kleptomaniac and a thief. And he can turn invisible. So that's the murder hobos.
Wow, that's awesome. I got involved with the role-playing games since the dawn of the hobby in the mid 70s. So yeah, murder hobos. It's always interesting because some people, especially but not exclusively younger people, that's what they want to do. They want to kill things and take their stuff, or kill.
Yeah, they kill the non-player characters. They take gear that they don't need. Just selfish, fun assassins. So I've actually been trying to talk Rich into doing it, just an issue of it or a short story for it. And he's got, like, he pitched me on pretty good idea. And I've let other writers come in and write stories. We had Steve Levine from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He did like 3 separate stories with us. We had Steve Mardo, who worked on Epic Tavern. He did a story with us. And then, of course, Jason Lynch and Ryan Brown, who's now the regular artist. Jarrett Melendez also wrote a couple of short stories that him and Ryan Brown worked on together. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, that is awesome. That's all for Murder Hobos?
Yeah, so what we're doing is, I love Jason and everything, but when you're collaborating with somebody who's in and of themselves a real life murder hobo, it's hard to make something that makes sense. And Jason is literally a murder hobo. So it's a very chaotic collection of stories. We're putting it out as the Chaotic Collection. It's going to be almost 200 pages long, and it's sequentially how the stories came out. So you shouldn't be confused how all these characters work out, but it's almost like little vignettes. You know, you get little 10-page stories of Roddy or Spectra or Venus, but you see how they all finally come together as a group by the end of it. And we're going to include this very limited edition early version of the book. It was our ash can, you know, and an ash can is a book you put out to sort of go, hey, this is my IP. So the earlier versions of it, like I think Jason got really high when he was drawing it, so he wasn't reading my script necessarily. He was just like, he had a high idea, and he was like, yeah, instead of them being the undead, they're going to be hippies, but it doesn't really make sense. But we're going to include that in the book too at the end as like a little special featurette, like, hey, this is the early version of this where Jason just did not pay attention to the script and decided to draw hippies instead of the undead. So
that is awesome. I suggested to Rich when I interviewed him that for instance, Gods of Brutality would make a great role-playing scenario, you know, and this
me and
would
Rich
make,
were talking about this today. One of the things that we've been doing with the murder hobos is we have gaming miniatures for them, but we're going to go a step further with Gods of Brutality. You ever seen muscle figures from the 80s? Those little flesh colored.
Mark and I were talking about that when I interviewed him. Yeah, that would be perfect for.
Yeah, we were thinking about doing muscle figures for Gods of Brutality. So expect those probably by the end of the calendar year.
Oh, that is fantastic. Yeah, because during the conversation too, those things were easy to visualize. And I think I even put it in the Facebook group that stuff like this is coming at some point. Richard shared the little figures that you talked about.
Yeah, we've got, let's see, I've got, these are the exclusives. Here's Roddy, a little dwarf.
Awesome.
And this actually glows in the dark too. These we called them the Rage Red edition, and this is Spectra Liaison, and because all elves in the Murder Hobo universe are neither male nor female. I'm gonna get it wrong. They're non-binary.
Okay.
Yeah, so they can be male or female, and so they're them. But yeah, so they are casting magic, and he is got his battle axe, and he's ready to do some damage. So those are the first 2 gaming minis we came out with, and we've got more though. And the We Don't Kill Spiders are in production right now, so you can get Bjorn, and you can get Revna as gaming miniatures within like a month.
That is fantastic. That opens the door to gaming modules to.
Well, what I do is, I write up little rules and stuff that you can use. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. You know, I'm like, oh, if you want to use this in Warhammer, these are generalized rules, or Dungeons and Dragons, or Zombicide. These are generalized rules if you put these characters into play. So he has like an aura of intoxication where everybody around him has to roll a 1d6 to see if they're drunk. and if there are, they might attack their allies. And then she can disappear every couple rounds because she's basically a drug addict, or they are a drug addict. And so you could be in the middle of battle and like be hoping that they are going to cast like an ice spell, but then all of a sudden they run off in search of pixie dust.
There you
So
go. Yeah, I told Rich if the miniatures come out while I'm running a cycle in the underworld, I do Greek mythology role playing for all groups of people. More so now during the pandemic than when a lot of things are no longer possible. But I told him if the miniatures come out, I'll sneak the characters into one of the games, because I use
well, the
miniatures
gods in
maps and all that.
particular, their design of the gods is very sharp. It's one of the
Yeah.
better looking Hercules designs, and I love Thor's helmet and the way they
Yes.
drew the hammer and everything like that. Mark's an absolutely fantastic illustrator, and the book is crazy, right? You know that like it's very R-rated. It's also very grindhousey in a way. It's a lot of fun. I love what they've brought to market with Gods of Brutality.
Yeah, me too. That's why I did the fan group, because actually, even though it's a small fan group, it's very active. It's much more active than a lot of the other like fan groups I set up. And everyone's really friendly, and it's been great.
Because it's the comic book industry is not a very large industry. It's a pretty small group of people that are actually into the comics now. That the Hollywood portion of it is very large, right?
Right.
Because people love movies, but the actual comic book industry, there's not a heck of a lot of creators that are actually full-time working, and we all make nice with each other, and our fan base is usually not as large as the Hollywood fan base either. So it's a little family.
It is. It's very interactive. Recently, since launching Legends of Hercules, I had Bob Layton on. Bob Layton did those Hercules in outer space comics that spanned decades to tell the story. I had Fred Van Lente, who did the Incredible Hercules run, and everybody's been phenomenal. And the phenomenality of everybody, including yourself and everybody else at Black Caravan, has led me to do more shows in the genre. So we just did our first spin-off show with John Pepe. So now we have 2 comic book related shows instead of 1.
That's awesome. Yeah, Fred Van Lente is one of the first guys to ever review my work. He's a solid dude,
Yeah.
a very smart writer. And Bob Hall is a legend of an illustrator. So
Yeah,
that's all I can say about that.
Fred went on to work on Archer and Armstrong after at Valiant, after he did the Incredible Hercules run, and people were telling me that's kind of like the spiritual successor to his Hercules run in Marvel. So I found that, even though I found the rest interesting, when I had a TV show years ago, I did a thing with Barry Windsor Smith. So I love Barry stuff on Conan, and so I had a segment on him. But it was Fred Van Lente's Hercules that resonated, most with what's possible with the character, instead of sticking him in different places. And he carried on that vibe into his Archer and Armstrong run.
Yeah, Fred's run on Valiant books in general are some of my favorite. So, and yeah, what he did with Archer and Armstrong is fantastic, as well as like him incorporating in the Eternal Warrior and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, he did great with all of those characters and weaving them into a really cohesive a narrative that was lots of fun. And he also dealt with conspiracy theories. Now we're all dealing with conspiracy theories, but he found a really amusing way to deal with them back then.
Yeah.
Now, I might be missing a title, but the only other title we haven't talked about is Phantom Starkiller. Can you that's a more science fiction type of thing?
Yeah, so that's based on a toy that was created by my friend Peter Gorel. He calls himself Killer Bootlegs. So me and him started working together about I don't even remember. It's been years now. But I started doing, he made this really cool toy that went to San Diego. It sold out immediately. Years later, I couldn't find the thing anywhere, but I could always find pictures of it online. And so I just started drawing him one day. And Peter reached out to me after seeing one of my pieces, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to work with me on doing some card art?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." So we ended up making a figure together. I illustrated the figure that he had constructed, and that became the card art for it. And then we followed that up about a month later with another figure. Did some more, art on the side for him. And then he followed up, I want to say it was like 2 or 3 months later, and he was like, "Hey, I've got a gig with Super 7 and we need card art tomorrow for Phantom Star Killer." So I was like, awesome. And it was for the glow in the dark version of Phantom Star Killer. And so I drew up this original piece. Peter liked it. And then that became the rarest figure from that particular run of Super 7's Phantom Star Killer. I went on to do 2 more pieces of packaging art for Super 7 with Peter. And then when that was happening, James Hake from Scout, he's the president over at Scout Comics, he wanted me to take over a horror imprint with Rich. So he offered it to us as a package deal, because he's like, it's not a 1-man job, it's a 2-man job. And so I was reluctant. Rich really wanted the gig to be a publisher, so we took it on. Rich, by the way, is an awesome, not only just human being, but graphic designer and creator and everything. So I knew teaming up with him and like our names being intertwined together for the foreseeable future was a good thing. So one of our first titles after signing this, or deciding to launch this imprint, besides Electric Black, which was me and Rich's title, was Phantom Star Killer. That was like the second title. And so I went to Peter with it, and I was like, "Hey, you've got this write-up on the back of your figures about this Curse of the Crypto Crystalline Stone and yada yada. Do you have a story for this character?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I want to tell this character's story." I was like, "Cool, let's make a comic book." Immediately after I said that, he went to his management team and they tried to sell it to another comic book company. But he went back to them and he's like, "No, I want to work with my friend making this thing." And so we got the gig. And I think from the time of inception till when we put it out was about 6 months.
Mhm.
And we had the first issue of Phantom Star Killer, which at the time, so let me back up. Electric Black became the top selling Scout book of all time. That's why we were handed the imprint, because Scout was like, "All right, you guys know what you're doing with horror, sci-fi, stuff like that." So that was James saying, "These guys know what they're doing, let's invest in them." So they gave us the imprint. Then I told James, "Hey man, this is going to be like the biggest thing that Scout's ever put out, period." He believed me. We put it out, and it was at that time, Phantom Star Killer was the biggest selling title Scout had ever produced again. So we had brought them 2 hits, and then we followed up Phantom Star Killer, which is he's a cosmic assassin who's transformed into a weapon, and he's sort of wiped of his, even though he's an alien, his humanity, right? And because I don't know what the word is for alien humanity. Is there a word for that?
Alienality? I don't know.
Alienality. He's wiped of his alienality. But upon meeting this child who has this particular hold on a cosmic entity, he's able to break free of his dark master's control and regain that piece of himself that he lost. And he's trying to do the right thing. So he's an anti-hero in a way. He kills a lot of things and aliens and people and stuff like that, but he's doing it to save this sort of cosmic Jesus, which is, her name is Acel. And then in the follow-up book, we have Count Draco Knuckleduster, and he is not like Phantom Starkiller at all. He is a devious scientist who is trying to break, the cycle of regular life, and he is made pacts with different things to elongate his existence in the cosmos. So he's out for nefarious and selfish purposes, and he's way more powerful than Starkiller in a lot of ways. And if you read both, you'll see why. So.
Oh, awesome. So there too, a universe grows. And
Yeah.
that is incredibly awesome. The variety that you guys put out is amazing too, because not all the comics, even though you can put them under the umbrella of sci-fi horror, are standing in the same place. They're kind of standing in different places.
Well, and we're not just sci-fi and horror, we're sci-fi, horror, and the bizarre, right? So
Okay.
yeah, Murder Hobo, and I'd say God's Brutality even in a way, and an upcoming book we have called The Ballad of Gordon Barleycorn, all sort of fall in that category. And we have some other very strange titles that we're about to be putting out, where it's more trippy, psychedelic maybe, than just your typical comic book, and usually more adult orientated stuff. We tend to veer that way towards mature audiences rather than for the kids.
And Rich was talking about a Dracula comic that's coming out.
Yeah, it's like tied into God's Brutality.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one too. I think that one's going to be a big book for us. Our big books this year so far, we have Pentagram of Horror, which is by Marco Fontanelli, Italian creator. This guy's a powerhouse. He does all the writing and drawing by himself, just like I do for the most part. It's a 5-issue series. Each issue is its own standalone story. So it's really cool. They're all double-sized issues, so you have a higher price point to get it, but you're getting like a bigger story. We've got Vanity coming out from a writer from Hungary, an artist from Russia. His name is Yuri. He's telling the real life story of Elizabeth Bathory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not flowery, it's pretty brutal, because people in the medieval times and Middle Ages and stuff like that, it was a brutal existence. And it's sort of a story about how she was made into the person she became. And if nobody knows who Elizabeth Bathory is, she was a serial killer from Hungary that supposedly murdered like 300 children or something. And so that's pretty bad.
Yeah, she had Giles de Retz. I don't know if I'm probably mangling the pronunciation. He was accused of werewolfery, even though he's famous. And she was accused of taking baths in the blood of her victims. Yeah, there's a lot of controversy. So I know you'll have fun with whatever research you do.
Well, Yuri is very tied into the story. It's one of the most beautiful and horrific things that I've ever read. It's hard to look at times. It's like you're seeing stuff you're not supposed to be seeing, but there it is. I am doing all the regular covers for that series. So all the direct market books the whole thing is like 300 pages so far. It's 3 acts. Each act has 3 issues. So it's 9 issues altogether, but you're getting 3 number ones. and it's a 3-act play. So that's pretty cool. And then one of our larger titles that's coming out right now is called Canceled. Thus far, it's a one-shot. I can tell you that the fan response just from the pre-orders of it have led us to have the writer go back and expand on the comic book. So it's called Black Caravan Premiere, David Burns Canceled. And it's about a like demonic entity that influences children through TV, radio, apps, all sorts of stuff. He's kind of like an evil Bozo the Clown slash
I remember Bozo.
Pennywise. He's got that kind of vibe to him. So people have been very interested in it. So that one's coming out. Murder Hobo is coming out through the Black Caravan imprint later in the year. We'll also have Stake. Well, Stake is about to hit shelves. That's moved over. And then we have Behemoth, Phantasmagoria, of course, Rich's upcoming title, Sergeant Werewolf, which is he did that through Patreon a couple years ago, and now he's bringing it to Black Caravan. I'll have Infernal Pact coming out later in the year. And then we will have the 3rd issue in the Phantom Star Killer saga, which is called Vice Admiral Acre. And then we have so many other things coming out. I could chew up like so much of your time talking about it. These are the ones that are on the top of my head.
No, that is awesome. And what do you call it? When it's time to promote them more, we'll schedule a show and you can talk about them, because these are awesome projects. They're very creative. They're very different. They're very edgy.
Thanks. Yeah. And again, we're trying to create a market. So years ago, there used to be Vertigo Comics through DC. It used to be the only line of comic book that I would buy anything from. Since they went away, we've been trying to fill that kind of void. And I know other companies are doing something similar. Like our competition is like Vault and Behemoth and Aftershock, and everybody's got these great line, and Boom and stuff like that, which is much larger than us. But everybody seems to be veering towards the horror and sci-fi stuff, because that's sort of like evergreen properties, in my opinion. More so than superheroes are done very well by Marvel and DC. It's really hard to compete with those markets at this point. But we can tell we're people that love comic books. We love the craft of making comic books. We understand the medium. And we're not just putting out crap. This isn't IP grabs. We love comic books. We're making comic books for people that love comic books.
Any plans on expanding into movies or TV shows?
I don't worry about that stuff. I worry about making comic books.
Okay.
If that stuff happens, it's really great. It's good for everybody, right?
It is, yeah.
That's not my end goal. My end goal is to make a good book.
Yeah, I think God's Brutality would make a great movie, and I think it would make a great video game, kind of like Diablo. And there's one that came out called Hades, where that takes place in the Greek underworld, and it's kind of Diablo-esque in getting together. Now, you also work for a collectibles company. You're the art director at Tracker Collectibles. And can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, these miniatures that I showed you, these are to a Tracker Collectibles toys. We also have made a Stabby Bunny plush toy. Tracker is highly ingrained with Scout Comics, right?
Okay.
So, if we're making something, it's probably attached to Scout at this point. We have talked to other people to. I don't want to say anything because I don't know if we had NDAs or something with them, but we've talked to other properties and stuff like that about picking up their stuff. But yeah, right now we're just focused on making action figures. We have a Roddy the Rotten, like a larger version of this guy. He's at like 5.5 inches tall. He's fully articulated. He comes with like axes and swords and bottles of booze and
Very cool.
monkey's paws and stuff. We've got a Phantom Starkiller that's online right now at Scout Comics. You can buy him, I think, for like $40 or something like that. He's a 5.5 inch figure that's exclusively through Tracker. We have an upcoming Phantom Starkiller, Count Draco like that as well. And then we just had a successful Kickstarter for our it's called the Prestige Figure Edition, and it's 375s, similar to Kenner's Star Wars figures, that size. So we've got a Julius Black, Phantom Starkiller, Gut Ghost, and Lillian from White Ash is the first line of figures.
Oh, great. I like those type of collectibles. I'm glad you're, moving in that direction, and you'll have things available immediately. That's really cool.
Yeah. And, like, I don't know if God's Brutality is going to be part of Tracker or if we're going to make it a Black Caravan thing at this point. We're weighing all our options. So, but yeah, the idea is we are doing something with Gods of Brutality in the near future, by the end of the year. And if not in an action figure, a muscle, or a miniature, it's going to be one of these things. We just need to find that one thing that we're going to go with and then stick with it.
And you will find it. So I'm looking forward to whatever happens as it happens. You also do like heavy metal type of stuff, a graphic novel and an upcoming album cover. Are you into heavy metal?
Yeah, that's pretty much all I listen to.
Okay.
Yeah. That being said, I listen to quite a bit of rap too, but
okay.
I just like heavy stuff. But yeah, I think when I was doing We Don't Kill Spiders, the entire run of the book thus far, I listened to a band called Hylung, which is sort of trancey Viking music.
Okay.
I don't know how there's a whole slew of these bands out there. They're either from Germany, Norway, Sweden. They're mixing old-fashioned, traditional music with modern tech stuff, and it's very cool. So a lot of that. And then I just went to go see Ghost. I don't know if you know who they are, but they're a heavy metal band. No. From like a Scandinavian region, and they all dress as I guess demons, and they're pretty satanic. So it's a good floor show. But yeah, it was them and this other band called Twin Temple. So we went to go see a show from them last week. But yeah, listen to a lot of heavy metal.
Yeah, I'm in my 60s now. Heavy metal spoke to me when I was in my 30s pretty powerfully. It was a period in my life, a lot of tumult, but also like looking at my conditioning process, all the programming I kind of grew up with. So heavy metal was part of my healing process at the time. Very powerful music.
For sure. I think heavy metal offers a positive vibe for people. Mm-hmm. And usually their concerts are a lot of fun. So don't miss out.
We're approaching the end of today's conversation, but I definitely plan on having you back to explore many of the things that you mentioned today. We kind of scratched the tip of the iceberg. You are someone who obviously followed your passion, and you made mm-hmm. something of it. A lot of people give up very quickly. They'll if something happens to thwart their plan, that's it. I gave it a shot, and my plan got thwarted. All creative people can tell you that your plans will get continuously thwarted. You just keep moving onward. Are there any words that you can offer to people who have a passion, but they're not taking any steps towards realizing that passion?
So I floundered around through a lot of my life. I was a person that was moved almost every year to every 3 years from the age from when I was born till I was 16. So it was really hard for me to be comfortable anywhere. I always felt like I had to move somewhere else. So for a lot of my 20s and 30s, I hopped through the entire country. I lived a lot of life. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen most of the country, and I haven't just seen it as a tourist. I like lived there. I studied the human character, and I worked in social services for 7.5 years. I think art is something you have to live. That's my advice. So you live hard for a bit, and you've got a voice. I think there's two ways to get here. One
Mm-hmm.
is you're just incredibly intelligent at birth, and you've got the opportunities, and you go to school and you come out, and you've got something to say. And then you've got life experience, and that's what I have. So my 20-year-old self couldn't have done anything that I'm doing now. I had to live my life to get here. So, and I tell this to high school students when I talk at high schools and stuff like that. If you're lucky, it'll happen to you young. If you're not, you just have to live your life and continue towards your goal, and you will get there. You just can't give up. It's very easy to give up, right? It's easy to be all or nothing. It's easy to quit. It's harder to follow a dream and stick with it. And I was close to, I was like mid 30s before any kind of success was happening to me. And that's a long time for people to wait to get somewhere. And now you have people like, I won't get too into it, but I have an adoptive family. My adoptive brother, very successful at a young age. And you know what? He earned that.
Mm-hmm.
He was also lucky, but like he was a talented person that was in the right place at the right time. And so success came early. So you don't want to compare yourself to people like that, though, right? Because it doesn't help you. You're not going to, you have to find your own way. He found his way early. That's great. But don't think that just because this person had it easy early, that you're going to get it easy early. You might be like 60 before it happens. If you don't give up, though, I have a feeling that it does work out for you.
I believe that too. I found that in my life, I had a television show. I made a movie. I appeared like Where's Waldo in a bunch of other movies. I got published in a bunch of paranormal anthologies. And again, these started out as ideas. I had no idea how I was going to get to any of them. And it was just basically don't giving up that I found works. Just refuse to take no. If you can get 1,000 no's,
You
but
will
you'll
eventually, you'll eventually figure out how to
Mhm.
work through a bad day and make it work for you.
Right.
Because a bad day when I was 25 was like, oh, forget it. And that was it
Mhm.
for a week. But I never lost sight of the goal. You know what it was? I started having a family, and
Mhm.
I just didn't want to, I wanted my kids to like know that I was worth something. So I decided to follow through on my goals that I'd been trying. My wife doesn't think I'm a piece of trash or anything like that, but I wanted to prove something to myself, and in the process prove something, that like, yeah, you can be anything you want.
And you've certainly done that, and the fact that you've done that has brought us a lot of really cool entertainment. So thank you for taking your journey.
Thanks.
And how can people explore your world further? You have a great presence, and you have many portals into your world.
I know there's too many. So Instagram, I'm on at Schmalke. By the way, my name is only attached to like 5 people on this planet. So
Okay.
it's SCHMALKE. So at Schmalke on Instagram is my handle there. I'm at Joseph Schmalke on Twitter. On Facebook, I'm Joseph Schmalke Storyteller. There's also a Schmalke Army, which is a fan-run page.
Oh, awesome.
That a bunch of, we've got like almost 600 followers or something like that at this point. I am an administrator there because I want to at least control the narrative a little bit, but I do not run this page. It's run by a conglomerate of other people. I have a Patreon page. That's really my big reveal page at this point. The minimum buy-in is $5. That gets you all the digital content, which is all the first looks on everything I'm doing. Variant covers, pages. I'm going to be uploading scripts soon, stuff like that. So unfortunately, for some reason on Patreon, you can't find me. So go on to either Schmalke Army. My Instagram page will link you directly to it through my bio, stuff like that. But on my Patreon page is the only way to read 7 Years in Darkness. I'm about to have my first physical reward. And if you want to buy it, the only place to buy it is through the Patreon page. It's not being sold anywhere else for the Ash Can, which is the 8-page preview. It's all being done on a risograph, which is a cool screen printing method done by machine. So there you go, a lot of that stuff. And if you're into like satanic witchy stuff, it's a cool book. I think you'll dig it. So yeah, so Patreon, Instagram, Facebook, those are the ways to get me. My website is really bad. I don't know how to update it, and I have this guy that hosts it, and he's a buddy of mine, so he kind of updates it when he gets time, but I don't really pay that much attention to it.
And you have an Etsy store, and
I have an Etsy store that opens once a month.
Awesome. I found your Patreon page by just typing in your name in Patreon, because I figured.
Oh, did you? You can find it now.
It took me straight there, and first I was asked if I was 18 years or older to proceed, so I said, okay, I'm 18 years older. Then, yeah, again, you had a lot of information there. Then it was like all these, to unlock this, become a patron. To unlock this, become a patron. So I like how you made it a game almost.
Well, all the Patreon backers get all this stuff, but at $10 a month, you get a physical reward. It's totally worth it. But I'm not forcing anybody to do anything. I have enough patrons right now that I'm happy with that. So I'm not pressing it out onto people. But if you want to read my new book, that's the only way to read it. So
I will include a link with the other links so people can get to your army easily in the Facebook group. And I want to thank you very much. I enjoyed our conversation. I wish you the greatest of success in all of these endeavors, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Dude, it was awesome meeting you, and thanks for having me on. Take care.
Be well, Joseph. And to everybody, before we go, as promised, I'm going to give my short promo for issue number 3 of Gods of Brutality. Our heroes bond with rock and roll until they're attacked by mud witches, not satanic mud witches. Well, actually, they're in hell, so they are probably satanic mud witches. Hercules and Thor continue to battle each other as well as their enemies. A subquest for safe passage leads to an adventure in a murder factory. Nick falls in love at first sight and finally unlocks his heroic heart. But in hell, is that a bad thing or a good thing? To be continued. Thanks, everybody. Good night. And thanks again, Joe.
Take care, man.
You too.